Hi, everyone. This is Jay Pulaki with HR Geckos. Welcome to the show today. Don't be a dinosaur, be a gecko. I'm the founder and CEO of HR Geckos, and we're based here in Maryland, in Howard County. And I'm so happy to be here to share my learnings about how not to be a dinosaur. As a startup, one of our biggest challenges is hiring new talent, right? Bringing on those really good team members who'll jive with everything we have to offer. Now, how many of you have seen this little pie chart? The top mistake startups make is hiring poorly. And I've seen this pie chart go around a number of times in the past year, especially after the pandemic, when our startup economy has really taken off. And one of the biggest learnings from my experience hiring for HR Geckos in the past 2 years is that if my team is not top-notch, my employment brand, my employer brand are not top-notch. So how do we put together a great employer brand? Now, as a startup founder, it's your job to make sure that you build the employer brand at the outset, right? You don't have a large team to do this. It's probably you and a couple of other co-founders or executive team members that you've put together initially. There are a number of ways in which you can build that internal employer brand, because your internal employer brand will inform your external employer brand, right? And how do you put that together? It's thinking about your mission, your purpose, your values, your core values that will drive what you really want to showcase as your employer brand. And there are many ways in which you can do this at the outset. There are different employer branding surveys that you can take internally with your startup team to figure out what that internal employer brand is, which will inform your external employer brand. And I always say that an organization is always as extraordinary or ordinary as its people. Right? And for a startup, it's even more challenging to showcase that employer brand. Now, we all have websites. I think one of the first things any startup founder does is put up a nice website, right? Now, use that website to showcase who you are. Have a career page. You might not have that many openings, but do have a career page that talks about what your purpose is, why you started the company, showcase who you are, so that anyone who is interested in joining your team understands why they'd want to work there. If you have any internal employee testimonials, even testimonials from contractors that you've hired are useful at this point in time. And if you can spotlight some of your employees' achievements on your website, try to do that as well. And as a founder, I'm sure you have a number of things that you can highlight that you offer to your team. So try to showcase that as well on your website. Company culture. Now, this is not going to happen overnight, right? As we all know, culture is something that you build over time. But initially, how do you showcase your company culture? Try to put together a document that talks about how you invest in the whole individual at your company. Not just the employee, but the whole individual. There are lots of examples out there where startups offer professional development opportunities outside of the job, right? They could be unrelated to the job, but in some way they also help them perform the job. So talk about how you invest in the whole individual. Talk about how you offer flexibility. That's a really big thing today, right? How, where, when you work is so important today to everyone, especially after what we've been through over the past 2.5 years. So the right toolkit will help you manage remote teams and distributed teams, and we have something like that we've built at HR Geckos that helps us foster our employee culture and organizational culture within HR Geckos. Also, try to communicate how you foster innovation, right? Innovation is fostered through collaboration and communication. But how do you communicate how you go about doing that? Try to showcase that through on your career pages, on your website, so that anyone who wishes to join your team gets an idea of how it is to work at your company. Now, one of the biggest things is knowing who you're looking for. And how does this come about? One of the biggest things you should do is create a recruitment plan. And I can't stress this enough. Think about all the skill gaps that you're looking for. How do you want to go about hiring for this particular position? How do you want to conduct the interviews, whether they're remote, whether they're virtual, whether they're in person, whether there are any assessments involved? Who will be in charge of conducting the interviews? Who will take care of the recruitment process? All of these need to be thought through before you even put that job posting out there. And then the job posting, right? This should be reflective and job related, especially as a young fledgling startup. You need to be inclusive in your job posting because you're setting the tone for the rest of your hiring for how many ever years to come that you're in existence, right? The hire on demand kind of approach works really well for startups as well, right? You really don't have to take all the time to put together a full-time team member versus hiring a contractor. There's so many ways you can do that through many platforms like Fiverr, like Upworks, where you can hire contractors on demand who fulfill that particular need at that particular time, and then you can go on to fill that role slowly without having to rush into filling it quickly to get that job done, right? Also, employee referral programs. They work really well for startups. I know a lot of people think that these don't work because there are a lot of diversity issues that come into play when you put together an employee referral program. But when it's used right and when it's deployed correctly, it's a great tool for startups. You can really get into the social networks of the startup employees that you've hired initially because they know what you're looking for and they can really refer the right candidates to your company. Today, we have to think about how global our company is going to become, right? We are no longer working in a little bubble. We are a global startup, if you ask me. We have no geographic boundaries. So you'll also have to think about how to put together a remote team and how do you foster the culture in a remote team, right? So these are things that you should be thinking about. And then, of course, talent pipelines. How are you putting together a talent pipeline, right? There are so many different steps to putting together a talent pipeline. All the steps that are involved in the screening process are so crucial. How do you interview? How do you conduct job-related assessments? Now, in the screening process, how many steps in the screening process? It's really off-putting if you have like 10 different steps right at the very outset, right? If you're thinking that you have to screen a candidate through multiple layers of interviews and telephone screens and assessments, you might lose that candidate, especially in today's job market. So think about how many levels you want to include in your screening process and how many interviews you want to conduct, whether they're on-site, whether they're virtual. Always keep thinking about this as you put together your recruitment plan as well as you create the talent pipeline. So you always have a number of people in line to fill positions as they come up as you're scaling as a startup. Interviewing. One of the biggest takeaways for me is making sure that your interview questions are job related. Please make sure that you are not asking questions that are unrelated to the job because, again, today a candidate is really, really interested in the purpose and the why of your company when they want to join a startup. And if you're going to be asking them questions that are not related to the job and they might, tread those boundaries of avoidable questions during an interview or even illegal questions during an interview, you might lose those candidates right there on the spot. So think through your questions, always have a set of questions that are job related. And the crux of all of this, the screening, interviewing, and assessment process is a job description. Always, always make sure that your job descriptions reflect the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you're looking for in a new hire. And always gear your questions and your screening process based on that job description. If not, that will make or break your recruitment plan and your recruitment strategy. Sourcing strategies. How are you sourcing candidates today, right? It's no longer the usual job boards, right? You've got to use social media, and you've got to be there. LinkedIn is one of the biggest sources these days for new hires, especially for startups here in the US and even globally. But there are so many other different ways that you can approach this. There are a number of placement cells in local community colleges and local universities that you can tap into. And let me tell you, our local community colleges have such superb talent. And you can really tap into this talent by approaching your local community college placement cells and talking to the career development centers there to get to that talent. And especially here in Maryland, we have a lot of resources to do that. And I've tapped into them a lot. And I've worked for a community college in the past, so I really do know how well these programs work. And I can't tell you how good they are. Or I rather can't stop telling you how good they are, because they are really good. Also, the freelance marketplace. Try to tap into the freelance marketplace, like I mentioned before, Upworks, Fiverr. There's so many different platforms. I think there's something called Design Hill. I've come across so many. Just Google them and see where you can find a contractual employee who can fulfill that particular skill at that particular point in time. And then, last but not the least, do not forget that onboarding is a very big piece of your recruitment strategy. You're going to lose employees faster than you hire them if your onboarding process is not done right. And today's environment really dictates that you pay attention to the onboarding process, because the current market is such that you can hire today and lose the employee tomorrow, or they can ghost you and not show up on the start date. How many of you have experienced that already, right? Ghosting is so big today that you really have to pay attention to how you onboard your new hire. How do you give them all the tools even on day 0? Think about day 0, not day 1, right? When you think about the onboarding process. And always think about the tools that you can use when you are onboarding new employees, when you are recruiting, when you're sourcing. There's so many tools out there today to help startups. We at HR Geckos offer a number of tools to, foster communication, to foster onboarding. But at the same time, there are also different processes which you can manually put together for a great employee experience. So think through those processes, because employee experience will make or break your company today. And as a startup, you've really, really got to pay attention to hiring, to not be a dinosaur and be as agile as a gecko. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. Yes. We'll give you a microphone.
Thank you, Celine. So my question is from an investment perspective. Startups have, very lean budgets. At what point do you think it's worth it to invest in either third-party recruiters or other resources that can help identify some of those candidates?
So in my experience, third-party recruiters would really be very useful when you have a budget for hiring. And as a startup, we are all bootstrapped at the beginning, and it's really difficult to outsource that particular skill, right? So as a founder, you really need to be the one who should be doing the hiring. You really need to be the one wearing all the hats. I'm sorry to say this, but that's the reality of things, right? And you really need to know how to put together a recruitment strategy for your company. And there's several different tools out there. You don't have to really approach someone who does it and has to be paid to do it. You can do it yourself, and there's so many resources in our ecosystem here at ETC. I think Brandon Adams offers a lot of information. There's TEDCO in Howard County that offers a lot of that. And there are many other innovative labs around the area that offer startups the means to put together a recruitment strategy and plan. But to your question, usually third-party recruiters come into the fray when you really have a very growing, a fast-growing team. So when you're really scaling fast and you've broken even with your budgets, that's when you would really think about a third-party recruiter. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. A
Thanks.
question about hiring more contract workers, especially in the beginning. I think it can be hard to hire someone and say, we don't have the benefits that a bigger, larger company will, et cetera. Is there a point in time at a company life cycle where you would say contractors are more important than not? Or I'm curious about your opinion on that.
So I've struggled with this, right? As a startup founder, you really want that full-time hire working all the time and, with you throughout the process. As a contractual employee, you really don't have them with you all the time. I mean, they're there, but they're really not there, right? It really depends on what you are hiring them for. Like, how important is that particular project or job to the growth of your company? At the very outset, if it's a project that is to showcase your company in the best light and to, gain those first 100 customers, then you really want to focus on hiring a full-time team member versus a contractual member. But again, as a bootstrapped founder, you might not be able to pay the salaries that someone you're looking for today might be asking for. And I did run into this in 2021 during the whole Great Resignation, right? I mean, people were asking for salaries out of the hat. It was impossible to hire as a startup. But a contractual employee in those days was very useful because you were really not able to pay those salaries even though the project that they were going to perform was crucial to the success of your startup. So it's always, thinking through how the environment is for hiring and how you're going to be able to afford to pay a salary that's being demanded at that point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. All right, then. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My information is on the last slide. Thanks.